Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our channel, where we explore the deepest and most terrifying mysteries of the world. Today, we have content that will chill even the bravest among you. We're diving into real stories from drivers who faced the inexplicable during their journeys. These are accounts of sinister shadows, malevolent presences, and paranormal encounters that defy all logical explanations. Get ready to hear stories that will mess with your mind and heart. From visions of spectral figures to terrifying premonitions, psychological escapes, and fears, these episodes will leave you questioning everything you think you know about life and death, and if we are truly alone, questioning your sanity. Story 1: Escape from the Cannibal Forest. It was a quiet night on the road connecting the suburbs to the city. The driver, a middle-aged man named Pedro, was heading home after a long day at work. The clock on the car's dashboard read a little after 10 p.m. He was driving down the deserted road, enjoying the silence and the lack of traffic. Pedro liked that part of the route. The winding tree-lined road offered a sense of peace and tranquility, contrasting with the chaos of the city. He was listening to his favorite music, thinking about getting home to rest soon. Suddenly, the headlights of a car appeared in the wrong lane, blinding Pedro for a moment. He didn't have time to react. He just swerved the wheel sharply to avoid a head-on collision. The car skidded off the road, crashing hard into the ditch bordering the forest. The impact was violent. Pedro felt a sharp pain in his right leg. With difficulty, he got out of the car and realized he was limping. Looking around, he saw that the front of the car was completely wrecked. He didn't know how he had survived such a serious accident. Still dazed, Pedro heard a noise. He looked up and saw, in the distance, the car that had almost hit him parked on the side of the road. It was a completely black vehicle, with windows so dark you couldn't see who was inside. Two men got out of the car, speaking a language Pedro couldn't understand but seemed to be Russian or German. The men approached slowly, and it was then that Pedro saw what they were carrying. Saws and knives gleamed under the moonlight. Panic seized him. He tried to move away, but his injured leg prevented him from moving quickly. With no alternative, Pedro started limping towards the forest. The men noticed his intention and quickened their pace, entering the woods after him. The darkness was almost total, and Pedro had difficulty seeing where he was going. He knew he needed to find a place to hide or something to defend himself with. The sounds of the forest were intense. The rustling of leaves, the chirping of insects, and the heavy footsteps of the men pursuing him created a terrifying symphony. Pedro felt his heart pounding in his chest. Every time he looked back, he saw the shadows of the men getting closer and closer. In a moment of desperation, Pedro hid behind a fallen log. He could hear the men talking nearby, their voices full of anger and impatience. Pedro held his breath, trying to make as little noise as possible. Suddenly, one of the men approached dangerously close to his hiding spot. Pedro saw a knife reflecting the moonlight. He closed his eyes, expecting to be discovered at any moment. But by some miracle, the men continued searching in another direction. As they moved away, Pedro took the opportunity to move. Then he stumbled upon something hard on the ground. Looking closer, his heart froze. They were remnants of clothes and partially buried human bones. Confirmation that the men were cannibals. Finally, Pedro heard sirens in the distance. The police were coming. He got up with difficulty and followed the sound of the sirens, limping as fast as he could. When he reached the road, he saw the police car at the top of the ditch. Two officers spotted him and ran towards him. Pedro explained what had happened while the officers checked the area. The men had disappeared without a trace. The police made a report, but the subsequent investigation was minimal since there were not many leads to follow. Pedro never managed to forget that night. The mystery of who those men were and why they were in the forest was never solved. Some nights, he still wakes up in a cold sweat, remembering the hungry eyes that pursued him in the darkness. And he always wonders, what would have happened if the police hadn't arrived in time? Story 2: Desert Encounter. It was a clear, quiet night on the deserted road that connected Lucas' small hometown to San Francisco. The trip promised to be long and lonely. Lucas, a 25-year-old young man, was excited and nervous about the new job opportunity in San Francisco. It was the first time he was making such a long trip alone. He checked the car, filled the tank, and checked the GPS before leaving. Lucas knew his inexperience could be a challenge, but he was determined to get there on time. The beginning of the trip was smooth. Lucas enjoyed the music and the view of the desolate road, feeling confident. After a few hours, his fuel gauge showed it was dangerously low. He hadn't seen any gas stations for miles and began to feel the tension rising. Lucas slowed down, carefully searching for any sign of civilization or help. The road seemed endless and empty, increasing his anxiety. After 20 minutes of fruitless searching, Lucas spotted an old police car on the shoulder. Relief was immediate. He parked behind the vehicle, hoping to find help. As he approached the car, Lucas noticed it seemed out of service. The paint was worn, and the lights were off. Still, he knocked on the window, hoping to find someone inside. There was no one. The interior was relatively clean, with a grocery bag on the passenger seat, suggesting the car had been used recently. While Lucas tried to make sense of the situation, he saw something moving in the distance. A strange figure began running toward him. Lucas' heart raced. The figure was approaching quickly. Lucas ran back to his car, locking the doors with trembling hands. Desperation started to set in. With the engine running, Lucas tried to start the car. The fuel was almost gone, but he had no other choice. He tried calling 911, but the call wouldn't connect. Looking in the rearview mirror, the figure was getting closer and moving in an inhumanly fast manner. Finally, the 911 call connected. Lucas quickly explained his situation, almost out of breath. The operator promised to send immediate help. The police arrived about 30 minutes later. They found Lucas in shock, still in the car. The officers put gas in the car and calmed him down. The strange figure had disappeared without a trace. The police searched the area but found no one. Lucas reflected on the terrifying encounter as he drove with the police escort to the nearest gas station. The mystery of the figure in the desert remained unsolved. He continued his journey, but the feeling of being watched never left him completely. Despite the police's help, Lucas never understood who or what the figure was that chased him in the desert. Was it someone trying to scare him? A hallucination caused by fatigue and stress? Or something more sinister and inexplicable? The answer was never found, and Lucas carries that doubt with him to this day, always looking in the rearview mirror, hoping never to see that figure again. Story 3: Delivery in the Forest. Working as a nighttime pizza delivery driver wasn't a problem for João. He enjoyed the tranquility of the empty streets and the generous tips he received from nighttime customers. However, that night, something felt different. It was near 3 in the morning when the order came in. The address was unusual, an isolated area near a forest. As João drove, the city's streets began to disappear, giving way to a deserted winding road. Streetlights became rare, and silence set in. The only company João had was the sound of the engine and the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. The sense of isolation increased with each kilometer until he arrived at the indicated location. There were no houses, just the dark, intimidating entrance of a forest. João parked the car and looked around, confused. He took out his phone and called the number provided with the order. The call was answered quickly, and a low, hoarse voice described Joao's car, asking him to look towards the forest. The headlights revealed a shadowy figure waving at him among the trees. Joao's heart raced. Something was very wrong. Reluctantly, Joao got out of the car and walked towards the figure, keeping a safe distance. When he got close enough, he realized there were two more figures hidden in the shadows behind the trees. Before he could react, the three men advanced, trying to grab him. Joao fought desperately, feeling the strength and determination of the attackers. He kicked, punched, and struggled, using all his strength to break free. Somehow, Joao managed to escape and ran back to the car, fear giving him speed. He locked the doors and sped off, trembling as he called the police. He drove frantically, not looking back, until he reached a safer area. When the police arrived at the scene, the men had already disappeared, leaving behind only the silence of the forest. Joao never managed to forget that night. Who were those men? What did they want with him? The answer was never found, and the doubt continues to haunt him. Every time he makes a delivery at night, he can't help but look into the darkness, fearing those figures might appear again, keeping the mystery and terror ever present in his mind. Story 4: The Black Cars in the Desert. It was one of those typical nights in the Nevada desert, where the darkness was absolute, and the vastness of the terrain seemed endless. Marcos, a seasoned 45-year-old truck driver, was used to these solitary night trips. He was driving his truck loaded with goods, listening to a true crime podcast to stay alert during the long journey. The night was strangely quiet. The only sound was the constant rumble of the engine and the desert wind against the windshield. The stars shone intensely in the clear sky, but the road ahead seemed like a black abyss. Marcos adjusted his position in the seat, feeling fatigue begin to accumulate in his shoulders. After hours of continuous driving, something unusual caught his attention. On the horizon, he saw 3 points of light that didn't move like typical vehicle headlights. As he got closer, he realized they were 3 black cars, all lined up in perfect formation. The car plates were curiously simple: 1, 2, and a TR. Marcos frowned. He had seen many strange things on his trips, but never anything like this. Keeping a safe distance, he watched as the cars moved in a synchronized manner, as if controlled by a single mind. The vehicles slowed down and exited the highway onto an unmarked dirt road that Marcos didn't even know existed. When the black cars entered the dirt road, their lights turned off simultaneously, leaving Marcos in total darkness again. He slowed down, trying to discern something in the vast void to his left, but he couldn't see anything beyond shadows. A chill ran down his spine. What were those cars doing there? And why did they disappear so abruptly? Marcos continued driving, but his mind was full of questions. He turned up the volume on the podcast, trying to concentrate on the story, but the image of the black cars wouldn't leave his head. Something about it left him deeply unsettled. The road seemed even more deserted after the encounter. Every little noise from the truck seemed amplified, and Marcos couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He checked his mirrors repeatedly, expecting to see the headlights of the black cars appearing again, but the road behind him was empty. As he drove, his mind began to imagine possible explanations. Were they government agents? A clandestine operation? Or something more sinister and inexplicable? He tried to push these thoughts away, but the sense of unease persisted. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Marcos spotted the lights of a small town on the horizon. He sighed in relief, feeling the tension ease a bit. He parked the truck at a gas station and got out to stretch his legs. The fresh desert air was good for his nerves, but the image of the black cars still hovered in his mind. While refueling the truck, Marcos decided to ask the gas station attendant about the dirt road and the cars. The man, an old guy with a tired expression, raised an eyebrow. "Black cars, you say?" Unmarked dirt road? Never heard of anything like that around here. Maybe you saw a ghost of the road, the attendant said, letting out a weak laugh. Marcos smiled, but the attendant's answer didn't reassure him. He got back in the truck, reflecting on what might have happened that night. The feeling that something was wrong wouldn't leave him. The trip to San Francisco continued without further incidents, but Marcos couldn't shake the image of the 3 black cars from his mind. He knew he had witnessed something unusual, something he might never fully understand. And so, the doubt and mystery remained. Who were the people in those cars? What were they doing in the desert, and why did they disappear so abruptly? The deserted Nevada road kept its secrets, and Marcos continued his journey with a new story to tell but without answers. Story 5: The Trap on the Road. Marta, a novice 28-year-old truck driver, was nervous and excited about her first big solo trip. She had just been hired by a small transportation company and was determined to prove her worth. The route was long, crossing several interstate highways during the night. It was around midnight when she set off. The darkness was dense, and the road ahead seemed like an endless river of asphalt. The constant rumble of the engine and the silence around were Marta's only companions. She adjusted her CB radio to the trucker's channel and kept her focus on the road. After a few hours of smooth driving, Marta heard a rough male voice on the radio. "A truck driver, I think you have a flat tire. Better stop and check before it causes a serious accident." Marta frowned. She hadn't felt any vibrations or difficulty driving, which usually indicated a flat tire. She thanked the information but decided not to stop immediately. Something about the man's voice made her uncomfortable, as if there was an urgency that didn't seem natural. As she continued driving, the voice on the radio became more insistent. "Seriously, you need to stop now. It could be dangerous to continue like this." Marta felt a chill run down her spine. It was clear he wanted her to stop, but why? Her mind began to race with possible scenarios. She knew she was inexperienced but not foolish. She decided she would only stop at the next truck stop, where there would be light and other people around. Ignoring the stranger's insistence seemed the wisest decision. Finally, Marta spotted the lights of a truck stop on the horizon. Relief was immediate. She pulled into the well-lit parking lot and turned off the engine. She got out of the truck, still feeling a slight tremor in her hands. With a flashlight, she began inspecting each tire carefully. To her surprise, all the tires were in perfect condition. No cracks, no punctures, nothing. Marta felt her heart race as she realized she had been the target of a deception attempt. The other trucker wanted her to stop in an isolated place, but why? What had he planned? Marta entered the convenience store at the truck stop, seeking some safety and distraction. While buying coffee, she noticed something out of the corner of her eye. A hooded man was standing outside, watching her through the window. Her heart raced again. She quickly left the store, keeping her head down and walking quickly back to the truck. As soon as she got in and locked the doors, she started the engine. She was about to leave when she saw, in the rearview mirror, the same trucker who had spoken to her on the radio. He was parked a few meters away, watching her every move. Without hesitation, Marta accelerated and left the truck stop, driving as fast as she could. Her mind was in a whirlwind of fear and adrenaline. The radio was silent, but she could feel the presence of that man, as if he were pursuing her. The road seemed endless, and every headlight in the rearview mirror made Marta jump with fear. She drove for hours, without stopping, until fatigue and exhaustion began to overwhelm her. She decided she needed to rest, but couldn't stop just anywhere. She spotted a small roadside motel and decided it would be safe enough. She parked the truck, locked all the doors, and entered the room, exhausted. She slept deeply, but her dreams were disturbed by nightmares of mysterious truckers and voices on the radio. When she woke up, something was wrong. The sun was already high, and she should have heard the alarm. She got up quickly and looked out the window. Her truck was no longer there. The room door was unlocked, and a sense of panic took over Marta. She ran down to the reception, where the attendant looked at her with a confused expression. "Your friend said you had already left," he said. "He took the truck for you." Marta felt a mortal chill as she realized the man from the radio had found her and stolen her truck. She was alone, without transportation, and unable to understand how he had managed to do this without waking her. The last thing Marta saw was a note left on the reception desk. In it was written, "You shouldn't have ignored the warning." Marta's story ends with her alone and helpless, without answers, and with a deep fear of returning to the road. The mystery of the sinister trucker and his intentions remains unsolved, leaving a constant and unsettling sense of danger in the air. Story 6: The Hitchhiker in the Appalachian Mountains. Sophia was an experienced truck driver, used to facing the long and lonely nights on the road. She enjoyed the silence and peace she found driving through the Appalachian Mountains. That night, the sky was clear, and the full moon illuminated the winding road ahead of her. The truck's engine purred softly as she drove through the dense forest covering the region. Around 2 in the morning, Sophia spotted a solitary figure by the roadside. It was a woman, apparently young, with a backpack slung over her shoulders. Sophia had never picked up hitchhikers before, but something about the woman's desperate expression made her stop. Perhaps it was the loneliness of the road or the feeling that something was wrong. The woman quickly climbed into the truck's cab, thanking Sophia repeatedly. Her name was Emily, and she said she was returning home after a long camping trip. She seemed exhausted and nervous, frequently looking back as if expecting to see something or someone. As they drove on, Emily asked to be dropped off near an isolated cabin. Sophia found the request strange, but the woman insisted, saying she lived there and needed to get there as soon as possible. The road became narrower and more deserted, and Sophia's sense of unease began to grow. Finally, they reached a dirt road. Sophia noticed that the forest around seemed darker and denser, muffling any sound beyond the truck's engine. At the end of the road, a rustic cabin came into view, its windows just black holes in the darkness. Emily pointed to the cabin and asked to be let out there. Sophia stopped the truck, but something made her hesitate. Looking around, she noticed furtive movements among the nearby trees. Men were hiding in the shadows, their silhouettes barely visible in the dim light. Emily got out of the truck and turned to Sophia with a strange smile. "Do you want to come in for some coffee?" "It's the least I can do to thank you," she said. But Sophia felt the fear grow in her chest. The men in the shadows were slowly approaching, trying not to be seen. "No, thank you. I need to continue my trip," Sophia replied, trying to keep her voice firm. She knew something was terribly wrong. Emily insisted one more time, but Sophia refused categorically and put the truck in gear. As Sophia drove away, she looked in the rearview mirror and saw Emily and the men entering the cabin. What was that? A setup for an ambush? A kidnapping? Sophia didn't know, but fear pushed her to keep going without looking back. The dirt road soon gave way to asphalt again, and Sophia tried to calm down. She turned on the radio and turned up the volume to drive away the disturbing thoughts, but the feeling of danger persisted. Every headlight in the rearview mirror made her jump with fear. Sophia drove to a truck stop, where she parked and got out to stretch her legs. She felt uneasy, unable to shake the memory of the men in the shadows. She went into the convenience store, seeking comfort in the presence of other people. While she was in the store, Sophia heard a news report on the local radio that chilled her to the bone. A woman had been found dead near a cabin in the Appalachian Mountains. The description matched Emily's. The police were investigating, but details were scarce. Sophia felt a deadly chill run down her spine. Who was Emily really? And the men in the forest? When she returned to her truck, she found a note pinned to the windshield. With irregular letters, it read, "You should have accepted the coffee." The psychological terror took hold of Sophia. She never discovered the truth about what happened that night, but the feeling of being watched never left her. Trips through the Appalachian Mountains were never the same again, and Sophia lived with a constant sensation that something or someone was watching her, waiting for the right moment to strike. The mystery remained, and the fear became a constant companion on her lonely trips, always reminding her of the hidden danger in the shadows of deserted roads. Thank you for joining us on this journey. May love and faith always guide your steps, even in the darkest moments.